concerning our southern border, where he defied federal immigration law and allowed 12 million illegal immigrants to come into this country. And so the hypotheticals that are being posed by our Democrat colleagues, sadly, we have lived in the last 4 years when you have a lawless president who does not follow the statutes passed by Congress and signed into the United States Code. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The credentials of each of you are impressive. Ms. Dillon, did you ever have Professor Paul Stephen at Virginia Law School?
I did, Senator. I think it was my first year.
Yeah. He's brilliant. He should be on the federal bench. He would have been if I had gotten here sooner. Mr. Wrights, I introduced Senator Cruz to some of his supporters one time. I was asked about him, and I said, no, let me tell you about Senator Cruz. He's brilliant, but so was the Unabomber. You've got to watch him like a hawk. Was that a fair description? You don't have to answer that. Is it true that after a Scot, Senator Cruz can burp the alphabet backwards? You don't have to answer that either. Let me say something serious for a second, and then I'll have one or two questions. You're all adults. You're all officers of the court. So I'm going to give you some advice. I may be wrong, but I doubt it. Don't ever take the position that you're not going to follow the order of a federal court. Ever. Now, you can disagree with it. Within the bounds of legal ethics, you can criticize it. You can appeal it. Or you can resign. For 4 years, I have watched people in this town, not everybody, but many, try to undermine the legitimacy of the federal judiciary. And it triggered each and every time my gag reflex. I've watched them try to pack the Supreme Court. I have watched an esteemed member of this body on the steps of the Supreme Court threaten Justices Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh. I've seen that. I've seen this body, some in good faith, but some in bad faith, try to impose an unconstitutional, violative of the separation of powers doctrine, ethics code on the Supreme Court, just to try to undermine their legitimacy. Now, all our judiciary has, an equal branch of government has its legitimacy. It doesn't have an army. Don't ever say you're not going to follow the order of a court. You may not agree with it, but that's my advice, and I think you ought to take it. Mr. Sauer, I'm glad to see that Hawley took you to a Cracker Barrel for lunch.
Yes, Senator, if you're familiar with the area, it's the one near Columbia, Missouri, about halfway through Missouri on I-70.
I've always thought of Hawley as more of a Whole Foods type guy.
I can only say that his description of it was accurate. It was chicken fried steak that we were eating.
I'm glad to see that his taste is getting better. Tell me, Mr. Sauer, give me an example of of an instance where a legislative body could pass a statute discriminating on the basis of race, which of course is a suspect classification, that could pass the strict scrutiny test?
I can't think of a hypothetical as I sit here. However, I am aware that there is a line of cases holding that.
I am too, but is there any way that a legislative body can pass legislation classifying people on the basis of race that passes strict scrutiny?
I can't imagine a scenario as I sit here, Senator.
How does the doctrine of equal protection apply to the federal government? I know the 14th Amendment says that the states can't deny our people equal protection of the law, but I don't see anything in the Constitution about the federal government in equal protection. It's not in the Fifth Amendment. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't, but how does it apply?
Senator, I believe there's a Supreme Court decision from the late 1940s or early 1950s that essentially incorporated the doctrine of equal protection. People say reverse incorporated the doctrine of equal protection through the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment.
You agree with the substantive due process model?
I have criticized that doctrine in many of the legal briefs that I've filed that I've disclosed to the committee.
Well, without it, how would we have equal protection of the laws applied to the federal government?
As I sit here today, I don't dispute the holding of what the Supreme Court held about 60, 70 years ago, and I accept that as binding law.
You just think they got the methodology wrong?
Well, you asked about the substantive due process doctrine. The doctrine of reverse incorporation is different than that. And as I sit here today, I'm not prepared to say whether they got it right or got it wrong. I'd have to read the opinion again. It is long settled in binding law, in my understanding, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. And in light of your initial line of questioning, I ask unanimous consent that at subsequent hearings, Senator Kennedy be bound and gagged. I'll withdraw that request and recognize Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I will take this opportunity to put up what I consider to be a red flag of a MAGA takeover of the Department of Justice. What we regularly see is extremely good bromides until we hit the area of Trump sensitivity. And I think we've seen it in this hearing too. And then it's like watching people fly into the Bermuda Triangle and all the navs and comms get weird. And I think that's a very strong signal of what folks' intentions are as we go into this. Project 2025 author Russ Vought said that it was his purpose to impose trauma in the federal workforce. And I think we're seeing those efforts right now with respect to FBI agents who were assigned, for instance, to the January 6th cases. We see repeated signals that politics now matters. We saw Attorney General Bondi ask members of the Department of Justice to disavow their own political beliefs in favor of, and I'm quoting her here, the political views that prevailed in the election. I don't think we've ever heard an Attorney General say anything like that before. We see the DC U.S. Attorney in office, not formerly like you, Mr. Sauer, in office, describe himself now as Trump's lawyer out to protect his leadership, unquote, when challenged by the media. The department actually has some pretty noble traditions of standing against politics and for the law. Recent examples include when the department stood against the Bush administration's unlawful warrantless wiretapping scheme and threatened mass resignations if it wasn't corrected. And it was corrected. That was a good thing. The department itself rejected its own secret, shoddy Office of Legal Counsel opinions that had propped up the torture program. That was the department cleaning up its own mess, not just going along with the signal from the White House. Most recently, you saw the department stand against efforts to involve the Department of Justice in the Georgia election subversion scheme. To me, those were noble days for the department. I don't see any chance of that happening. What I see in front of me now is an Environment and Natural Resources Division that has already been decapitated. No coincidence that the biggest polluters are the biggest donors to Trump's campaign. I see the entire kleptocracy, anti-kleptocracy initiative of the Department of Justice eliminated, canceled, just as we watch a president cozy up to Vladimir Putin. Whatever Trump Russia was, it still is. And to take down the department's effort that goes after Russian oligarchs who prop up Putin sends a terrible and, to me, unjustifiable signal. We have seen a fake grand jury investigation mounted in order to create, or at least attempted to be mounted, in order to create a pretext to allow a fund that the president objects to but is way too late to veto to be seized and held back from the obligations on it that Congress has provided. And recently we saw a flagrant pretense that the withdrawal of the prosecution of New York's mayor was not part of an agreement, the Latin term for agreement being quid pro quo. And then you saw Tom Homans from the administration go right onto TV and say, yeah, this was an agreement, and if you don't honor it, I will be, and I won't use the phrase that he used because it's vulgar. I hope that in some way I can call to each of your sense of decency so that when the moment comes, which it will, when you're asked to choose between the public duties of the Department of Justice and the political imperatives of the Trump administration, you'll come down on the right side. I'm sad to say I don't see any indication of that right now.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you to each of the three witnesses.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kennedy.
I want to raise a point of order. I forgot to ask William and Caroline if they had anything they wanted to add. Anything? How about vote for my dad? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for the interruption.
An excellent ground to close the hearing. Congratulations, each of the three of you did a terrific job. Senator Kennedy did an okay job. For everyone's information, written questions for the record can be submitted until tomorrow at 5 p.m., and the committee will ask each of the nominees to answer and return the questions to the committee as soon as possible so that we can quickly schedule committee votes. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.